Okay, yeah, good evening everyone. We're extremely sorry for the delay. We faced some technical problems because of which we had to start a bit later than what was scheduled. Okay, so the topic for today is respiratory system, and as a part of this session, okay, today we'll be talking about first of all, a brief introduction about respiration. Okay, the purpose of the respiration. Okay, that is what we'll talk here. Then the various parts of the respiratory tract. Okay, so we'll talk about the various parts of the respiratory tract, starting from nose. Okay, that is we'll talk about the nasal cavities in detail about the nasal cavities. Then going forward, pharynx. Then you have larynx. Then trachea, right? Bronchi, and finally alveoli. Okay, so we'll discuss all these aspects, okay, all these components in detail, and then we'll move on to the structure and location of the lungs. Okay, of course some of these are actually components of the lungs itself, so these two are actually part of the lung tissue. Okay, so we'll get to that in a minute, and then finally we'll discuss the mechanism of breathing. Okay, where we'll discuss the events that occur during inspiration and expiration. Okay, the inspiration or inhalation and expiration. So these are the things that we'll discuss today. Right, so these are various aspects that we'll cover as a part of today's session. Okay, so we'll start with the first aspect. What is respiration? In short, okay, respiration is, okay, is taking in gases, okay, taking in oxygen, and this is the basic definition of respiration. Okay, taking in oxygen, taking in air. Okay, the respiratory system is there to ensure that the oxygen actually enters your body and the carbon dioxide leaves your body. That's the whole purpose of your respiratory system. Okay, that's the whole purpose of your respiratory system. Now the oxygen, as we know, it is coming from the air, but where is this carbon dioxide coming out from? So if you look at the actual, so taking in air is inhalation in short, and releasing out gases, okay, the exhaust gases is expiration or exhalation. Okay, now when you take the air, you're getting your oxygen. This oxygen is the one which is actually being used for the oxidation of carbohydrate, okay, to form the carbon dioxide, and this is the carbon dioxide which we are releasing out. So the purpose of respiration is ultimately oxidation of foods to release energy. Okay, the purpose of respiration is you need oxygen, all the cells of your body need energy, and you will get energy only when you oxidize the glucose or oxidize any other carbohydrate or any other protein molecule or any other fat molecule. When you oxidize them or when you burn them, in simple terms, oxidation is nothing but burn. And if you are burning, just like fire, if you are burning something, you need oxygen, just like fire. So that oxygen is being taken in through your lungs. Okay, through the respiratory system, you are taking in oxygen. This oxygen is being supplied through blood, is being supplied to the various cells of the body, right? And the various cells of the body through food you are getting your carbohydrate to the various cells of the body, right? Through food you are getting your carbohydrate, to be specific simple molecule like glucose through the, so you're getting your oxygen from the lungs and then carbohydrates through food, or glucose molecules through food. Both are entering the cell, and inside the cell through the process of your glycolysis and the TCA cycle you're getting your energy. And in the process what is happening to this glucose, this 6-carbon glucose, the 6-carbon glucose is being converted into 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, and this oxygen is actually coming from your air that we are breathing in, and you're finally getting your energy. So this is the, if you have to talk at a molecular level, what is the main purpose of respiration, this is what is happening. Okay, so you need oxygen for the oxidation of foods, in short glucose specifically. Okay, I'm not saying that other molecules are not getting oxidized, but 90% of the time it is the glucose which is oxidized to provide us energy. Okay, because it is very simple and we have all the enzymes required for oxidation of glucose to release energy readily in all the cells of our body. So because of which glucose is the chosen molecule. It's the molecule, even if you eat proteins or fats, okay, most often they are actually converted into carbohydrates. Whenever you need energy, they are converted into glucose or derivatives or the broken down products of glucose like your pyruvate or other molecules. Finally they'll go through either glycolysis or the TCA cycle to release carbon dioxide and energy. Okay, so that's the basic purpose of your respiration. Okay, now, so basically gaseous exchange actually happens in the respiration. So all these cells, what is happening here, all these cells are actually taking in oxygen and releasing out carbon dioxide. This carbon dioxide is being brought back to the lungs again, and through the air it is actually released out. Okay, through the blood it is brought back to the lungs, and through the air it is being released out. So this is in short the entire, at a molecular level, this is what happens. The oxygen that we are taking in is actually helping in the entire process, and the carbon dioxide which is released as a waste because of the degradation of the food products, okay, the glucose molecules is being released out of the body. Okay, so that is about the brief introduction about respiration and the purpose of respiration. Then we look at some aspects like the parts of the respiratory system. So the first part that we'll discuss is the nose. Okay, so the openings of the nose, the two openings of the nose are called the nares. Okay, nares are nothing but the openings of the nose. Right, the nares open into the nasal cavities. Right, the nares open into the nasal cavities. Right, so these nasal cavities, as you have two nares, okay, or two openings, you basically have two nasal cavities. Okay, these two nasal cavities are separated by a bone and cartilage material. These two nasal cavities are separated by bone and cartilage material. Okay, so they are separated by bone and cartilage material. Now there are few aspects in nasal cavity that you have to remember. Okay, so before actually looking at the various details, so let me just show you the picture. So these are your nares, and this entire thing is your nasal cavity. So you have nasal cavity. So from the, let's say this is the left opening, you have the nasal cavity, one half of the nasal cavity here, and the other half is on the other side, and these two cavities are separated with a bone and cartilaginous material. Okay, so that is, now this nasal cavity, okay, have several other things, okay, that you have to remember. Now what are the things in the nasal cavity that you should remember? Nasal cavities have hairs. Okay, you have hair in your nasal cavity, and this hair, okay, helps in or traps the dust molecules or the spores or pollen, anything that can actually enter our lungs and create problems for us will be blocked by these hairs. Okay, all these hairs actually block those. Okay, then these nasal cavities are actually covered with, okay, are made up of mucous membrane. Okay, the cavity's outer layer is mucous membrane. They have an outer mucous membrane, and this mucous membrane, like any other mucous membrane, will produce mucus. Now the purpose of this mucus again is to trap any such molecules. Okay, trap dust molecules, and when it traps the dust molecules, the mucus, right? So let's say you have mucus here. So the mucus is actually picking up the dust molecules. So what will happen? So the mucus gets collected and starts moving down. Okay, starts moving down. So you can either spit it out through your mouth, all the dust particles that are collected by the nasal mucus, you can spit it out through the mouth, or you can simply swallow it so that it can directly enter your digestive tract. So these are the two ways by which, or you can, when you cough, it will simply come out. It will simply come out. So the mucus basically traps anything that can harm our lungs or internal organs, and the mucus then moves to the pharynx region, this region. Okay, and through the pharynx region you can actually spit it out. Okay, because the pharynx region is actually connected to your oral cavity, your mouth. Okay, so you can spit it out, or it can be swallowed, which will go down your digestive tract. Okay, now, so this mucous membrane, the purpose of the mucus is that trapping, and then once it is trapped, the mucus is pushed down to the pharynx region, from where it's your choice whether to spit it out or let it go into the digestive tract. Okay, so the mucus, below the mucous membrane you have the submucosa. Okay, below the mucous membrane you have the submucosa, and an important property, an important characteristic of this submucosa is it is supplied with many blood capillaries, rich blood capillaries. Okay, it's supplied with many blood capillaries, and because of that reason, okay, and blood actually maintains the temperature of your body is constantly maintained. Okay, and blood is also a part of your body, so the temperature of the blood is always constant. So here, just because the submucosa is supplied with constant supply of blood, whatever air you breathe in, okay, the air will be made warm and moist by the blood capillaries present in the submucosa. Okay, the air that we breathe in, okay, will be made. So even when you are in the coldest of countries like Canada or anywhere else, okay, you will still, your lungs will still get warm air, because the submucosa is supplied with blood capillaries, and the blood capillaries will change the temperature of the air that you breathe in. It makes the air warm and moist, and thus making the breathing process easy. Okay, then since it is supplied with rich blood capillaries, okay, even a minor accident or even a minor pressure on the submucosal layer will end up in nosebleeds, will cause nosebleeds. Your nose bleeds very quickly because it is supplied with lots and lots of blood capillaries. Okay, then in the roof of the nasal cavity itself, there's one more component, which are the odoreceptors. Odoreceptors. Okay, so you are able to sense, okay, you are able to smell because of these odoreceptors. Okay, and these odoreceptors are basically ciliated cells. Okay, these ciliated cells act as odoreceptors. They act as odoreceptors, and these odoreceptors are directly connected to your brain, and the brain will perceive the signal coming from the odoreceptors as smell. Okay, so whatever signal the odoreceptors will send, the brain will actually convert that into the signal of smell. Okay, so that is about the odoreceptors in the nasal cavity. Now, there are two openings that you will see in the nasal cavity. Okay, openings. What are the openings that you see in the nasal cavity? Okay, so the two openings are, you see, the nasal cavity. Okay, so here you see how close the eyes are to the nasal cavity. So the tear glands open into the nasal cavity. The tear glands open into the nasal cavity. Tear glands or lacrimal glands. Lacrimal glands are the ones which actually produce your tears. Okay, when you cry, the lacrimal glands will start secreting tears. Okay, so those lacrimal glands or the tear glands are actually connected to the nasal cavity. That's the reason why when you cry, your nose will also start to run, because the tear glands in your eyes are actually connected to the nasal cavity. So the tears from your eyes will start moving into the nasal cavity and that will come out through your nose. That's the reason why your nose starts to water when you start to cry. Okay, the other aspect is this nasal cavity. The other opening that the nasal cavity has is the nasal cavity has a connection to the sinuses in your skull. Sinuses are nothing but the cavities in the skull. Okay, there are some cavities in the skull and these cavities are called sinuses, and some of the sinuses actually open into the nasal cavity. Okay, and the sinus headaches that people get is because of accumulation of fluid in these sinuses. Okay, and these accumulation of fluid in these sinuses actually causes actually increases the pressure in these sinuses, and that increased pressure is the ones which is actually responsible for your sinus. That's the reason why people keep pressing these regions when you have sinus problems. Okay, because the fluid gets accumulated here and that fluid causes pressure, and that pressure is the one which is actually generating the sinus headaches. Okay. Now, so those are the two openings, the tear glands. Okay, so the tears, whenever you cry, the tears will directly enter the nasal cavity, and also the other thing, that sinuses of the skull. Sinus of the skull. Okay, what else? So after all this, okay, the nasal cavities. So this is all the information that you need to understand about the nasal cavities. Finally, the nasal cavities open into the pharynx region. Okay, specifically the nasopharynx. Okay, the pharynx region is divided into three parts. Okay, the entire pharynx is actually funnel shaped, and the entire pharynx is actually divided into three parts. The top part is called the nasopharynx, then you have the oropharynx, then you have the final laryngopharynx. Okay, so here. So you see here, the nasal cavity is opening into this part, the light blue color part, and that light blue color part is your nasopharynx. Okay, is opening into your nasopharynx. Okay, then you have the oropharynx. Okay, what is this oropharynx? Oropharynx is where the oral cavity opens. Okay, so because of this, the pharynx is the one which actually connects the respiratory tract and the digestive tract. Okay, at this point, okay, your respiratory tract and the digestive tract, okay, are actually meeting. Okay, this part and this part is actually meeting in the oropharynx region. Okay, in the oropharynx region you have a connection. They both open into the nasal cavity opens into the, so pharynx actually connects the nasal as well as oral cavity. So you have your nasal cavity coming from here, and you have the oral cavity coming from here. Both are actually opening into the pharynx. This entire thing is your pharynx. Okay, so the opening, the region where the nasal cavity opens is called the nasopharynx, and the region where the oral cavity opens is called the oropharynx. Okay, so this is the opening of your mouth. So this is your mouth, this is the opening of your mouth. So the region where the mouth opens, okay, is your oropharynx. Okay, so we'll look at the pharynx details now. Pharynx or pharynx. Okay, now in simple terms, this is called the throat. Okay, in common language we call it throat, and this throat actually connects the nasal and oral cavities. It connects the nasal and the oral cavities. Okay, and like I said, it has three components: the nasopharynx, right, oropharynx, and the laryngopharynx. Laryngopharynx, right? Three components. Now, so this is the nasal cavity opens into nasopharynx. Okay, nasal cavity opens into the nasopharynx. Now, oral cavity opens into oropharynx. Okay, the oral cavity opens into oropharynx. Now, laryngopharynx, okay, this laryngopharynx opens into the larynx. Okay, the laryngopharynx actually opens into your larynx. Okay, so here you can see, okay, the blue part, okay, is your laryngopharynx, or it's called as hypopharynx, and this is actually opening into your larynx. Okay, this part is actually opening into the larynx. Okay, so this is your laryngopharynx, which is actually opening into the larynx. Okay, now if you look at the nasopharynx, one important aspect that you have to remember here is, okay, the auditory canals, auditory tubes actually, okay, auditory tubes, that is the tubes which actually start from the middle ear. Okay, your ear has auditory tubes, then these tubes which start from the middle ear, auditory tubes of middle ear, will actually open into nasopharynx. So you have a connection between your ears as well as your pharynx. Okay, okay, opens into nasopharynx. And these auditory tubes, I'll give you the exact name. These are called eustachian tubes. Eustachian, eustachian tubes. Okay, so these eustachian tubes, they start from the middle ear and they open into your nasopharynx. Okay, they open into your nasopharynx. Okay, so that is about your the pharynx part is okay. One other aspect that we have to remember about pharynx is your tonsils. Okay, and these tonsils are actually present at the junction between oral cavity, okay, and pharynx. So you have your tonsils and you have your pharynx. Okay, so this is present at the junction, okay, where your pharynx will start to go down. Okay, the more, so basically you have your, so somewhere, so in this region, okay, somewhere in this region where your oral cavity is ending and the oropharynx is starting, you will actually find the tonsils. Okay, you will actually find tonsils in this region. Okay, now these tonsils which are present at the junction of oral cavity and the pharynx, okay, at the junction of the oral cavity and this is, the tonsils are lymphoid tissue. Okay, they are basically they have a ring shape, okay, and it's a lymphoid tissue, and lymphoid tissue always rich in B and T lymphocytes. Okay, and lymphoid tissue, if you remember your immunology, lymphoid tissue is a secondary secondary immune organ. Okay, so that is, so wherever, so secondary organs, okay, wherever you have secondary immune organs, these organs basically serve as battlegrounds for the interaction between your antigens and antibodies, or antigens and your immune cells. So you have immune or lymphoid organs, okay, lymphoid organs. So you have your primary lymphoid organs, okay, which are your bone marrow, sorry, and your thymus. Okay, so these are the two components which where actually your lymphocytes mature. The B lymphocytes mature in the bone marrow and the T lymphocytes mature in the thymus. Okay, once they mature in these two regions, they go and sit in different parts of the body. Okay, they are mainly concentrated in some parts of the body. Okay, why are they sitting in some parts of the body? They are sitting there, okay, anticipating the entry of antigens. So wherever there's good chance of harmful organisms coming in, these go and sit, and those tissues where you see rich lymphoid cells, okay, is called the secondary lymphoid organs. And by sitting there, what they do is they'll capture any antigens, okay, any organisms that can actually harm us, any bacteria, anything that can harm us. So basically when you eat food or when you breathe in, okay, breathe air in, so these tonsils sitting at the junction of the oral cavity and the pharynx are actually picking up any microorganisms that can come through the food or through the air. Okay, so these are the lymphoid organs, and like I said, lymphoid organs are rich, they have lots and lots of B and T lymphocytes, and B and T lymphocytes are the immune cells which actually provide you with your immune protection. Okay, they are the main cells which are actually responsible for your acquired immunity. Okay, so here basically whatever we eat, some of the microorganisms are being captured directly by the tonsils here, and even the air that we breathe in, they are also, whatever harmful things are there, they are also being filtered or being captured by the B and T lymphocytes in the lymphoid tissue which we call the tonsils. Okay, so that is one other important aspect that you have to understand about the location of the tonsils and why are the tonsils important. Okay, the reason why your tonsils swell up when you have infection is because they captured lots and lots of bacteria and they are actively fighting them, and because of which you have those swellings. Okay, so specifically when you have streptococcal contaminated food, when you take streptococcus food contaminated with streptococcus, you basically have streptococcal infection, and that streptococcal infection is being fought by the B and T lymphocytes of the tonsils, and that is the reason why your tonsils swell up. Okay, and they start to, the inflammation reactions and all are because of that aspect. Okay, so we'll move to the next component, which is your larynx. Okay, now larynx is a cartilaginous structure. Okay, larynx is a cartilaginous structure. Now, so it's made up of, it's not a strong bone, it's a cartilage. Now, if you look at the, so this larynx is the passageway for, your passageway for air from pharynx to trachea, the next part. Okay, so this is the path. So you have your pharynx ending somewhere here, and then through the larynx, so this is your pharynx, through the larynx it opens into the trachea of the lungs. So this is the passageway. Larynx is the passageway between pharynx and your trachea. Okay, so here, so this is where your pharynx is ending. Okay, this is where your pharynx is ending. Then this is the passageway. This, you see the passageway. Okay, so this entire passageway is called the larynx. Okay, so the pharynx, you can say it's the connection between the pharynx and the trachea. So this is your trachea. This is your trachea. Okay, so it is the connection, or it is the passageway between your pharynx and the trachea. Now, there are some important aspects that you have to understand about the larynx. Okay, now larynx basically has a triangular shape. Okay, so it has a shape something like this, not exactly like this, but somewhat like this. Okay, now the tip or apex, the apex of the larynx is what we see as your Adam's apple. The apex forms the Adam's apple. Okay, the apex that you see, okay, is the one which actually forms the Adam's apple. Okay, so this part, this cartilaginous material that you see is your larynx. This is your larynx, right? And this tip or the apex of this larynx is the one which is actually projecting out through your neck as Adam's apple. This is your Adam's apple. Now, why is this actually present? This is actually present because there are many components behind this, and the main function of the larynx is to protect all the components. So all these components together, whatever there is there inside, everything together is called the larynx. Okay, the entire thing is formed, is called the larynx. Okay, now what all components are there inside the larynx and what is this cartilaginous material actually protecting, that we'll see. Okay, so this larynx actually houses the vocal cords. Okay, it is actually covering the vocal cord. Okay, these vocal cords, as you know, is necessary for generating sound. The reason why we are able to speak is because of the vocal cords. Okay, it houses the vocal cords, and between those vocal cords are basically membranous structures. You will actually see them like this. You have two membranous structures like this, and the air will pass through this, and when the air is actually passing, these membranes will start to flap, because of which we are able to generate different kinds of sounds. And this central aperture or central slit, okay, that you see in the vocal cords, it's called the glottis. Okay, so let me just show you. Okay, so these are your vocal cords. So this is your vocal cord, right? And this gap, the central opening, okay, so this will actually lead to the trachea. This will actually open into the trachea. The central gap which is going down, okay, is called the glottis. This is the glottis. So your vocal cords are present around the glottis. These are membranous structures present around the glottis. So whenever you want to speak something, the air is actually coming out from here, from the bottom, from the trachea, and basically you are moving these cords, okay, and just like any musical instrument, when you move the cords, different sounds are produced. That is how you are actually able to generate different kinds of words and different kinds of, if you are singing, different kinds of songs. Okay, so all that is because you are actually able to move your membranes, okay, and these are your vocal cords. So your basically larynx is actually present here. The larynx is actually protecting the entire. So when I say larynx, we are talking about the entire thing. The cartilaginous material, okay, let me just correct that. The cartilaginous material of the larynx is actually protecting it. Okay, now what else do we see there? So this glottis, on top of the glottis, you will actually see epiglottis. Glottis. Yeah. On top of this, you will actually see the epiglottis. So you see here, so basically, so this is the opening, the glottis region. Okay, you have glottis here. This, you have an opening here. This is the glottis, and this flap. Okay, let me just draw that. This flap that you see, right? That flap that you see, this blue color. Okay, the flap that you see here, that's your epiglottis. Okay, so your glottis is the opening and your epiglottis is the flap. Okay, and your food is actually coming from here. The food is actually coming from, sorry, not from the top, from the oral cavity. The food is actually coming from the oral cavity. So the food can actually enter through the glottis into the respiratory tract. Okay, so in order to prevent that, okay, what will happen is whenever you are swallowing food, whenever you are eating food, this, okay, the larynx will actually move up. So this whole portion will move up and the flap will actually close. So the hole is like this and you have your flap on the top like this. Okay, you have the flap on the top like this. So whenever you are eating food, what will happen is this will start moving up. When the hole moves up, okay, the flap is still like this. The hole is now closed like this. Okay, the whole hole will be closed by the flap. Okay, the flap is actually closing the hole. So epiglottis is basically preventing the entry of food particles into the larynx, and again into the larynx through the epiglottis the food can actually enter your respiratory tract, which can be dangerous. So in order to prevent that, whenever you are swallowing food, the epiglottis is actually, so it's like this. You have a hole here and you have your so basically you have your hole here, you have your epiglottis here. Whenever you're eating food, epiglottis is coming like down like this, so that the food can actually move down from here. The epiglottis is being closed. Sorry, the glottis is being closed by the epiglottis. Your epiglottis is coming down and closing the glottis region, preventing the entry of food into the respiratory tract. Okay, so that is about the various aspects that you need to understand as far as larynx is concerned. Okay, all these components that we discussed, whether it is the vocal cords, whether it is the epiglottis, whether it is the glottis, everything, whether it is the cartilaginous structure, everything will come under your larynx region. The entire thing will come under your larynx region. Okay, then, so once we move past the larynx region, we move past the larynx region, we move into the trachea. Trachea is this long tube, as you can see, right? This long tube, which actually is also called as windpipe. This is also, trachea is also called as windpipe. Okay, trachea is also called as windpipe. Okay, now this so basically this trachea has many C-shaped cartilages. So you see this C. So all those white things are your C-shaped cartilages. Your trachea is actually covered with C-shaped cartilaginous rings, and these cartilaginous rings actually prevent the collapse of the tube inside. Okay, so these cartilaginous rings are actually holding the trachea up straight. Okay, it is being held like this because of those cartilaginous rings. The moment you remove the cartilaginous ring, the entire thing will simply fall. Okay, the entire tube will simply fall. Okay, so and behind this trachea, you will actually see the esophagus. Okay, behind the trachea you will actually, so the trachea, in other words, is in front of the esophagus, and this tracheal tube and the esophageal tube is separated by a muscular wall. Both are separated by a muscular wall. So behind this you have your esophageal tube, and both are separated. This tracheal tube and the esophageal tube are separated by a muscular column. Okay, so if you look at the internal structure of the trachea, right, the tracheal internal structure is actually, so inside the tube, okay, here you will actually see cells, and these cells are pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. Pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. Okay, so when I say cilia, they have several cilia like this. So the entire trachea is covered with cells with many cilia, and in addition to these cells, columnar epithelial cells, you will also find something called goblet cells. Okay, you will also see the goblet cells. Now the function of the goblet cells is to release mucus. They actually secrete lots and lots of mucus. By the way, Mucus, you have both spellings are correct. MUCOUS, both are acceptable. Okay, so basically goblet cells actually release the mucus. So in between you have the goblet cells, and these goblet cells will start secreting mucus. Okay, so the entire thing will be covered with mucus. The entire thing will be covered with mucus. So whenever you breathe in something, let's say the dust particles actually skip the mucous membrane in your nasal cavity. Okay, you have mucous membrane in your nasal cavity. Somehow it skipped that part. It skipped the hairs in the nasal cavity. Okay, then the next stop would be the trachea. In the trachea, like I said, the goblet cells are actually secreting mucus. The entire thing is covered with mucus. Okay, so this mucus will actually trap those particles. The mucus here will trap whatever is coming, whatever has actually escaped the initial trapping mechanisms will be trapped here. Okay, once they are trapped, these cilia, okay, so this is going down, this is going to the lungs, and this is coming from the top, okay, from the nose. So these cilia which they have, so basically you have cell like this, they have cilia like this. The molecules are actually trapped, let's say here in the mucus. The cilia will start pushing these molecules upward, not downward to the lungs. They'll start pushing these molecules upward. They'll keep flapping, and these flaps will actually cause the molecules to move in this direction. And finally, from the trachea, these dust particles, whatever are trapped here, are pushed all the way to the pharynx. And in the pharynx, again, you can spit it out or you can swallow. From the pharynx, because pharynx is the common connection between it's the common connection between the respiratory tract and your digestive tract. So once the materials are pushed to the pharynx, it's your choice to whether you want to spit it out or whether you want to swallow it. Okay, so that is how the ciliary movement of the tracheal pseudostratified columnar epithelium is helping to push the dust particles. That is how your lungs are being protected. Your lungs are being protected. And what happens in smoking is in people who actually smoke, okay, in people who actually smoke, these cilia will be destroyed. Those cilia will be gone. So all the soot, okay, the smoke particles, the soot, okay, the soot is no longer trapped here. It is not being pushed away. So what will happen? The soot will directly enter the lungs. It gets deposited in your lungs. People who smoke, their pseudostratified cilia will be destroyed, and the soot will directly go and get deposited in your lungs, and that is why it becomes difficult for those people with smoking habit to breathe. Okay, because the soot is actually getting accumulated. Okay, because their cilia are not actually pushing out those particles in the soot outside. Okay, so that's the reason why people with smoking will have problems in their lungs, because the ciliary epithelium is damaged in them. Okay, so this is the mechanism, just to show you. So this is the mechanism. So these cells are your goblet cells, and the goblet cells are actually releasing the mucus. So here you have another goblet cell. It's actually releasing mucus. Okay, whatever dust particle is coming, dust particle is actually sticking here. Okay, and the cilia, by moving in this direction, are pushing everything towards the pharynx. Everything is being pushed towards the pharynx. Okay, everything is being pushed towards the pharynx. Thus your lungs are being protected. Okay, now that's about trachea. Okay, trachea basically has C-shaped rings, okay, holding it together. Without those C-shaped cartilaginous ring, the entire thing will fall down. And it has oesophagus on its or in other words, the trachea is actually anterior to the oesophagus, in front of the oesophagus, and the tracheal tube and esophageal tube are separated by a muscular lining. And you have pseudostratified columnar epithelium and goblet cells in your trachea, and goblet cells secrete mucus. The pseudostratified cilia will start, the cilia of the pseudostratified epithelium will start pushing the trapped molecules, the molecules which get trapped in the mucus, back to the pharynx, from where you can actually spit it out or swallow. Okay, so that is about the trachea. Then if you go down further, we will see bronchial tree. Okay, if you go down further, we will see the bronchial tree. Okay, so let me just show that quickly. So your trachea, this is your trachea. I hope you can see this, right? This is your trachea, right? The trachea is now splitting into branches, and these branches are what we call the bronchi. Okay, the trachea actually splits into branches, and these branches are what we call the bronchi. Okay, so basically your trachea is coming like this, and it is actually splitting into two halves. Okay, two halves. Each half will go into, each branch will go into one particular lung. Okay, one particular lung. So these initial branches are bigger, and these are called the primary bronchi. Primary bronchi. And just like the trachea, which actually has the cartilaginous rings, okay, just like the trachea which have the cartilaginous rings, okay, even the bronchi also has the cartilaginous rings. Okay, you can see here. So it's actually splitting into two. Okay, you have one, the left one, the right one going into the right lung, and the left one going into the left lung. And just like your trachea, even these have the cartilaginous rings supporting them. Okay, so they prevent them from collapsing. Okay, the cartilaginous rings prevent them from collapsing. Okay, so now two branches, each branch going into one lung. Okay, now so this primary bronchi will then again split into, okay, secondary bronchi. Okay, and these bronchi will continue to divide and subdivide. So finally from the secondary bronchi, so these will again divide and subdivide, okay, to finally form bronchioles. Okay, and these bronchioles roughly have 1 mm diameter. So just imagine how thin they are. Okay, bronchioles finally have 1 mm diameter. Okay, and yeah, so when this stage starts, okay, basically when the bronchioles start, you don't see no cartilage rings. Okay, as they get thinner and thinner, okay, as the tubes split more and more, branch out more and more, the final small branches like the bronchioles and all will not have the cartilaginous rings. You don't see the cartilaginous rings in these, okay, in the bronchioles. Okay, now these bronchioles, okay, finally let's say these are 1 mm tubes, right? These are 1 mm tubes, and these 1 mm tubes suddenly opens into wide space. Okay, opens into wide spaces. Okay, so wide enclosed spaces, and these wide enclosed spaces are what we call the alveoli. Okay, the bronchioles open into the alveoli. The bronchioles finally open into the alveoli. Okay, the bronchioles open into the alveoli. Now, in people with asthma and all, right? In people with asthma and all, basically these are the ones which are being constricted. Okay, so pressure is applied on them. So few chemicals actually cause these tubes to close, and that is the reason why they have difficulty in breathing. Okay, the bronchial contraction is the reason why in people with asthma breathing is a major problem. Okay, bronchial contraction. Okay, so finally we are at the last stage, which are your alveoli. Okay, so if you look at the alveoli, right? Now alveoli, you will see that in a lung you will actually see there are 300 million alveoli. Okay, alveoli are nothing but your air sacs. Okay, air sacs are there, sometimes also called as air pockets. Okay, anything. So these are present, these are at the tip of your bronchioles, and you will see that there are around 300 million alveoli in your lungs. And 300 million alveoli, if you look at the surface area, the surface area will come to around 50 to 70 meters square, which is equivalent to the area of a tennis court. Okay, so if you put out all your alveoli, they are sufficient to cover the entire tennis court. Okay, the surface area is equivalent to your tennis court. Okay, so they have large surface area, so they can take up a lot of oxygen at a time. Okay, that's what I'm trying to say here. Okay, so these alveoli are supplied with blood capillaries. Each alveoli is supplied with your blood capillaries. So you have arterioles coming in and venules going out. So basically you have the supply. So you have your like this. Okay, let me show you the diagram. Okay, so you have your terminal bronchiole. Okay, you can still see the cartilage rings. Okay, then further branching out is happening and the bronchioles are starting. You are not seeing any more cartilage rings. Okay, and at the tip of your bronchioles you have your alveoli. Basically they are bag-like structures, several bag-like structures. So each one is a pocket, each one is a sac. Okay, so you have each one is a alveoli. Okay, each bronchiole is ending with a single alveoli. Okay, and these alveoli, okay, so this is, let's say this is one pocket, so the entire thing. Okay, each alveoli is supplied with a blood capillary. Okay, this is your alveoli, the outer layer. Okay, that alveoli, so here it's coming here. Okay, the alveoli is being supplied with the blood capillary. Okay, constantly. So whatever air you breathe in, the air will first enter your nasal cavity, and through the nasal cavity it will move on to the nasopharynx, from the nasopharynx through the laryngopharynx into the larynx, through the larynx glottis, glottis to your trachea, trachea to primary bronchi, primary bronchi to secondary bronchi, secondary bronchi to bronchioles, and finally at the tip of the bronchioles you have alveoli. So all the air that we breathe in are actually coming finally to the alveoli, and this alveoli have very thin wall. Okay, they have very thin wall. Okay, so the air that we breathe in is coming here, and that air has oxygen. Okay, that air has oxygen. The oxygen will come in. Okay, and these are basically sacs supplied with blood, and these the endothelium layer, that is the blood capillary layer, okay, is also thin. Okay, so simply the oxygen will diffuse into the blood capillaries. The oxygen will diffuse into the blood capillaries, and any carbon dioxide which is generated at the tissue level, the various cells, each and every body, each and every cell in our body is supplied with these capillaries. So all the carbon dioxide released by the various tissues, okay, are being released into the blood, and basically if you see, the RBCs actually carry most of the carbon dioxide. Okay, we'll discuss the mechanism at a later time, how the carbon dioxide is actually converted into bicarbonate in the RBC, and how the RBCs come here and finally deliver the carbon dioxide into the alveoli, and how the carbon dioxide is finally pushed out. Okay, so that's a beautiful mechanism. We can discuss that at some time later. So this is what happens. So finally your carbon dioxide is being pushed out, the air is being taken, the exchange of gases, okay, the exchange of gases occurs in your alveoli. Alveoli are pockets or sacs, small bag-like structures. So the air will enter into these bag-like structures. They have a very thin wall, and through that thin wall the oxygen will simply diffuse and enter the blood capillaries, which are actually supplied, or which are actually binding, or which are actually close to the alveolar wall. From there, from the blood vessels, the carbon dioxide again will enter the alveoli and is actually pushed out of the, from the alveoli again bronchioles, bronchioles to secondary bronchi, secondary bronchi to primary bronchi, primary bronchi to trachea, then through the finally through the nasopharynx and the nasal cavity out. Okay, so that is the entire path that the molecules are actually taking. Okay, now another important aspect that you have to understand here is these alveoli, okay, are supplied with immune cells like your macrophages. They're called alveolar macrophages. Alveolar macrophages. The function of these macrophages, so if with the air, suppose the whatever microorganisms are there, they actually, they were able to escape the initial part, which is your mucous membrane of the nasopharynx. They were able to skip the trachea and finally somehow enter the alveoli. You have alveolar macrophages sitting there, which will actually trap them and kill them. Okay, these are phagocytic cells. They'll simply engulf them and kill them. Okay, so you have protection at various levels, and that is what you have to understand about the alveoli. Okay, now we'll look at the structure of the lungs. Okay, so if you look at the structure of the lungs, and one important aspect that I forgot to mention is these alveoli. Okay, inside the alveoli you see a coating. Okay, the inner surface of the alveoli is coated with a surfactant. Okay, it's coated with surfactant. Okay, this surfactant is basically surfactant is nothing but soap-like material. Okay, this is basically a lipoprotein here. This surfactant is a lipoprotein. So this inner layer is actually coated with that, and that layer, the surfactant actually prevents the alveoli from closing. So when the walls come closer, they won't stick and collapse because they are coated with the surfactant. Okay, so the surfactant is actually preventing the alveoli from closing. They don't close completely because their inner walls are actually coated with the surfactant. Okay, now coming to the lungs, right? There are a few things that you already know. You have a pair of lungs. They're paired and they are cone shaped, right? And they are present in the thoracic cavity. Okay, so if you look at your body, your entire body is divided into many cavities. Okay, so you can see here you have your cranial cavity in which your brain is actually sitting. So basically cavity is nothing but empty space. Okay, so you have your thoracic cavity. So the entire central region of your body, okay, this part has a lot of free space. Okay, so this portion is actually divided into two halves. Okay, you have a muscular band here. Okay, a muscular band here. So in your just below your ribs, okay, just below, somewhat below your ribs, you have a muscular band which is covering, which is actually, so you have a table-like structure just below your lungs. Okay, it's made up of muscle. The entire thing is made up of muscle, and that muscular structure which is actually dividing the abdominal cavity, okay, sorry, the ventral cavity into the thoracic and the abdominal, and the these two components, thoracic and abdominal cavity, is your diaphragm. The diaphragm is a muscular structure which actually separates your cavity into two halves here. Okay, the thoracic cavity, which actually houses your heart, okay, lungs, right, and some part of the esophagus, all of them are actually present in your thoracic cavity. Okay, and the remaining portion, your stomach, okay, are actually present in the bottom half, the abdominal cavity. Okay, so the esophagus, which is actually going down, will actually pierce through this wall and open. Here you have your stomach. So your diaphragm is actually sitting here. Your diaphragm is actually sitting here. Okay, so the esophageal cavity will have to pierce through this and then form the stomach in the abdominal cavity, and all your intestine, everything will be there in the abdominal cavity. Okay, so your diaphragm is actually sitting right below your lungs. So in other words, your lungs are resting on the diaphragm. Your lungs are resting on the diaphragm. So you have your lungs here. The lungs are here. The lungs are actually resting on your diaphragm. Okay. Now, so like I said, they are present in the thoracic cavity, the upper half. All the portion all the cavity that is there above the diaphragm is your thoracic cavity, and below the diaphragm is the abdominal cavity. Okay, so you have your thoracic cavity, it's there in the thoracic cavity, and on each side you have your trachea, which opens into each lung. Okay, trachea opens into each lung. So basically trachea branches out, forms two bronchi, primary bronchi. Those primary bronchi enter each of the lungs. Now if you look at the lung structure itself, okay, the lung structure itself, you will see that the left side, the left lung, okay, the left lung, okay, this is your left, okay, so left of the image. Okay, so the left side of the lung has only two lobes. Okay, the left lung has only two lobes, one bigger lobe and one smaller lobe, but the right lung actually has three lobes. Okay, 1, 2 and 3 lobes, right? 3 lobes are there in the right lung. Okay, it's called the upper, middle and the lower lobe. Okay, so you have 3 lobes in the right one and 2 lobes in the left one. So you have some space here in the left one because it has only 2 lobes. So the heart actually aligns towards the left because of that reason. Okay, you have some space because the left lobe, the left lung has only 2 lobes, so there's ample space for the heart to place itself, because of which the heart is actually placed somewhat towards the left. Okay, so your lung has basically the left lung has 2 lobes, right lung has 3 lobes, and each lobe, okay, so left lung has 2 lobes and the right one has 3 lobes, and each lobe is divided into many lobules. Each lobe is divided into many lobules. Okay, and basically these lobules will have the bronchioles and alveoli that we just discussed. So the lobules are actually made up of your bronchioles and alveoli. So this is what is the internal structure of the lungs. Okay, internal structure of the lungs. Now if you see, you will have to understand something here. The entire lung, okay, the entire lung is actually covered with, a, you can see here, there is a serous membrane. The entire lung is actually covered with a membrane. You can see the blue thing here. So your lung is actually covered with a membrane. Okay, lung covered with membrane, and this membrane is called the pleural membrane. This the membrane that is actually covering the that is actually covering the lungs is called the pleural membrane. Now let's understand something about the pleural membrane. Okay, this pleural membrane is actually a serous membrane, and it secretes serous fluid. Okay, it secretes serous fluid, and basically this membrane has 2 layers. The pleural membrane has 2 layers. The pleural membrane has 2 layers. The outermost layer, okay, outer layer is called the parietal pleura. Okay, parietal pleura, and the one which is actually facing the lungs, the one which is actually towards the lungs, it's called the visceral pleura. You have parietal pleura, P-L-E-U-R-A, and visceral pleura. Okay, now the parietal pleura actually is attached to, or is actually bound to, okay, bound to the thoracic cavity or thoracic walls. Okay, it's actually bound to the walls of the thorax. Okay, thoracic cavity walls. Let me just correct that. It's actually bound to the thoracic cavity walls. the outer layer of the complete membrane which is actually covering the lungs, okay, it's called the pleural membrane, and the pleural membrane outer layer is connected to the thoracic cavity walls. What about the inner layer? Inner layer is actually sticking to the lungs, okay, and between these two layers, so you have your lung here, right? You have your lung here, and the lung, this visceral layer, right? So this is your visceral layer which is actually sticking to the lungs. Then you have some gap here, and after that you have your parietal layer, and this parietal pleura is actually sticking to, is actually bound to, or is actually connected to the thoracic cavity wall of the thorax, okay, and this gap over here, okay, this gap over here has, you know, these two layers here stick with each other, okay, these two layers, though there's a gap, these two layers stick with each other because of surface tension. Because of surface tension, these two layers actually, the parietal layer and the visceral layer stick with each other because the surface tension, okay. So just to tell you briefly, surface tension is a property which you see in water molecules, okay, where one water molecule sticks to another water molecule. What happens in water molecules? In water molecules you basically have oxygen, and then you have your hydrogens, right? And because the oxygen is highly electronegative, okay, it is greedy, it is actually pulling the shared pair of electrons towards itself, okay. So hydrogen and oxygen are sharing a pair of electrons, and this shared pair of electrons is being pulled towards the oxygen more, because of which the oxygen will get partial negative charge. On the other hand, since the electrons are going more towards the oxygen, you have partial positive charge here on the hydrogen. So what will happen here is, when you have another water molecule in the vicinity, okay, so this has partial positive charge, this has partial negative charge, there will be an attraction between the partially negative oxygen and the partially positive hydrogen. So all the water molecules are interconnected because of this. This is your hydrogen bond. Because of this hydrogen bond, they are actually, all the water molecules are held together. So this is the reason why you have surface tension, okay. So the same surface tension exists between the layers of, so basically what we are trying to say here is, there's some sort of hydrogen bonding between those two layers, because of which those two layers are held together, okay. In other words, if I start moving the thoracic cavity up, okay, the layer which is attached to the thoracic cavity is the visceral pleura. So the visceral pleura will also move up. Since the visceral pleura is connected to the parietal pleura with the help of the surface, because of the surface tension, the parietal pleura will also move up. And since the parietal pleura is connected to the lungs will also move up. So anything that pushes the thoracic cavity up will actually move your, or will actually compress your lungs also, okay. Any aspect that can actually move your thoracic cavity wall up will cause the lungs also to move up, or will create a pressure on the lungs, okay. So that is something that you have to understand here, okay. So these are the various aspects about the respiratory, the various components of the respiratory tract, the structure of the lungs, the important aspects that you need to understand. So this is very important. You have to understand here, at the base of the lungs you have your diaphragm. Now the lungs are covered with a pleural layer, a pleural membrane. That pleural membrane has two layers, the parietal pleura and visceral pleura. Visceral pleura is connected to the lungs directly, but the parietal pleura is connected to the thoracic cavity wall. However, between the parietal and the visceral pleura layer, between these two you have surface tension, and because of that surface tension, they are held together. Okay, they hold each other. So if something pushes the thoracic cavity up, that will obviously push the parietal pleura up, and since the parietal pleura is connected to the basilar pleura will also move up, and the lungs will also be compressed or will be moved up. Okay, so this is the basic setup of the lungs and the various components of your respiratory tract. Since we are already out of time today, what we'll do is we'll talk about the mechanism of breathing as well as the pulmonary volumes tomorrow. Okay, respiratory volumes and mechanism of breathing. We'll talk about that in tomorrow's session, and hope you understood everything that has been discussed today in this session. So see you tomorrow. Don't forget to subscribe on our YouTube, Facebook and Instagram channels, and do try our app. There are many interesting things, many interesting modules that we keep adding on our app. You should try them, and until then, see you tomorrow around the same time. Okay, bye.